welcome back to my channel. So as you saw from my previous video, I'm jumping on the Casey Anthony trial so I can see for myself why the jury found her not guilty. I'm going to start with the charges that she had. She had seven. She had first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to a law enforcement officer. So the prosecution opening statement was as expected, exposing the countless lies Casey told everybody. And it was a good opening statement. Nothing more can be said for that. It screams that she's guilty. Then the defence's opening statement was a totally different angle, saying that Kaylee drowned in a pool, and also saying that Casey was abused by her father. Bit of a bombshell for the jury there, and a few other spanners thrown in for good measure, like a guy called Roy Kronk, which we will presumably find out about later. So obviously it's going to be interesting. So the first witness up is George Anthony, Casey's dad. He worked at the sheriff's office in Ohio in a number of roles. He was an auxiliary officer, full-time officer, and then he was a detective dealing with varied cases. He has 2 children with Cindy, Lee, who's the oldest, and then obviously Casey. George left law enforcement and went to work at the family business with his dad in 1984, but George left in 1987 to start out on his own with his own car dealership company. Eventually the business wasn't doing very well, so they decided to move to Florida, where his parents and Cindy's parents both lived. Lee was 7 at the time and Casey was 3 when they moved, and then Cindy went back to work. George was going to join Florida law enforcement but decided against it as he knew how demanding it was, and Cindy really didn't want him to. So George then went into private security. They found out Casey was pregnant in May or June of 2005. He was extremely excited but concerned for Casey because she would be a single mum. He wanted Casey to be happy and enjoy the pregnancy. He wasn't sure of who the father was or who Casey was seeing at the time. Cindy and George did everything they could to make Casey's life as easy as possible. They went to appointments, ultrasounds, etc. He was excited. They knew that Casey would stay at home when she had the baby until Casey was ready to go out on her own. They show a picture of the Anthony's home. Casey worked up until about 3 weeks before she had Kaylee. She worked for a sub-company of Universal Studios, which was Colourvision. They were all at home when Casey went into labour, so they obviously took her to the hospital, and within a few hours Kaylee was born. George was in the delivery room, but he didn't look at all what was going on. The subject of who the father was brought up at some point, either before or after the birth, he can't remember, because they wanted to know and they thought the father should know, and he obviously had an obligation to a child. There was a name given by Casey who she thought could be the father, and George can only remember the surname of Baker. But then there was someone else that George knew of that Casey had been seeing by the name of Jesse, who worked with Casey at Colourvision. Who could obviously also have been the father. George met Jesse on the day Kaylee was born on the 9th of August. That meeting didn't go very well, and he said that Jesse didn't make a very good first impression. 2 days after Kaylee was born, her and Casey went back to the family home. Jesse was then welcomed in by the family, as George wanted to get to know him if he was potentially Kaylee's father, but later DNA testing showed that Jesse was not the father. George did play a bit of a father role to Kaylee, as well as grandfather role. George and Cindy did all they could as grandparents and provided as much as they could. In 2008, Kaylee was a very vocal child and could put a lot of words together. She could change channel on TV, put on her DVDs. She was a very bright child. Then they broached the subject of Casey and where she worked. So when he was asked if he believed if Casey was working, he wanted to believe her, but he had his doubts. She said she still worked at Colour Vision in event planning and had another part-time job. She still had the universal ID and she told him what she was doing, so he believed her. Cindy was working full-time Monday to Friday, and George was working afternoons 3 till 11, Sunday to Thursday. So obviously when he and Cindy weren't available to take care of Kaylee while Casey went to work, Casey had told her parents that someone called Zanny was looking after Kaylee. I show a picture of Kaylee. 16th of June 2008 started off as a normal day. George was up and he was taking care of Kaylee while Casey was getting ready for work. Nothing unusual happened. George was watching TV and Kaylee came in dressed with her backpack on. George asked where she was going and she said she was going with Mummy. George asked where and she said to see Zanny. Casey said she might be staying over at Zanny's, which was something that happened now and again, or she stayed over at a friend's, so it wasn't out of the ordinary. George had never met Zanny. Kaylee and Casey left, and that was the last time he saw Kaylee. So now we get on the bombshell of Casey telling of the abuse by her father, George. George says he has never sexually assaulted his daughter, Casey. He was not present in the home when Kaylee died. Now, it pans it over to Casey and she sat there shaking her head. Oh, it made me so angry. He would have done anything he could to save his granddaughter if anything had happened to her at their home. He did not dispose of Kaylee's body, nor did he obtain duct tape and put it over Kaylee's face. So the cross-examination, and at this point my stomach turned because I just felt so bad for the guy, because I knew this was not going to be an easy cross-examination at all. So Casey was 6 to 7 months pregnant when George found out. He didn't know for sure before because he just thought she was holding water or she was bloated. He had an inkling, but he didn't know for sure. He noticed changes, and the attorney is pushing as to why he had no idea she was pregnant when she had a belly. He, like I said, thought she was retaining water. And I'm observing George handle these questions, and I think he's doing so well to handle basically being sat against the firing squad, because this attorney is out for blood. And the attorney keeps pushing as to why he didn't ask who the father was before he did. I don't see what difference it makes, to be honest. George had made a statement to the FBI in 2008 stating that he had a feeling for the last 2 years Casey hadn't worked. He never saw a paycheck, but it's something he wouldn't check on either. He never asked to speak to the nanny. He never spoke to her on the phone. He never heard Casey speak to her on the phone. He never saw pictures of the nanny. No information at all except for what Casey told him. So why wouldn't he take his daughter at her word? I don't understand why the attorney's pushing as to why he'd never met this nanny when, his daughter's an adult. She can organise this herself. Why should he have to go around checking everything she does? George did, though, go to Casey's second job because, he had his suspicions, so he did. He did eventually find out that she did not work there. George never went to Universal Studios, though, to see if she worked there. June the 16th, said Kaylee loved to swim and would go as much as she could. And he said Kaylee could get out of the house relatively easily. I mean, she sounds like a very forward 2-year-old girl. George did move out of the house in 2005 due to financial issues that put a strain on their marriage, and he told Cindy he had a gambling problem and also he fell for a Nigerian bank scam. But he did move back in, but there was some tension between him and Casey, but nothing major. It was just due to him moving out. So we go back to June the 16th, and Kaylee and Casey left the house that day at 12:50 p.m. and George left about 2:15. And because George has described what Kaylee was wearing that day, the attorney is now saying, well, what did Cindy wear that day? Basically, why could you only remember what Kaylee was wearing? It's his granddaughter. It's his only granddaughter. He's going to remember what she was wearing that day. This is so frustrating. When Kaylee first went missing, George spoke to his workers' comp lawyer for advice. He didn't have him on retainer, and they were friends, so he asked him for advice as a friend. And that lawyer was at the house the same day as Casey's lawyer was there. So, you know, the attorney kind of looked stupid with that line of questioning. George first found out his car had been towed on Sunday the 13th of July, and they picked up the car on the 15th of July. When picking up the car, George could smell a decomp type smell, and he said, I hope it's not my daughter or granddaughter or both. It was uncomfortable. The cross-examination was really uncomfortable to watch, but I think George did really well to hold his own and not crack under the barrage of questions. So the redirect, when George went to Casey's second job at Sports Authority, I'm presuming it's some sort of sports store, he was met by a young man, and he told him he's Casey's father. Is Casey there? And this man said, Casey who? So George asked to speak to management, gave a description. He was obviously told that no one by that name or that description weren't there. So George got in his car and left. He told Cindy, and Cindy was not happy, and he just let it go after that. The attorney, the workers' comp attorney that George knew, had helped him in the past when George had some injuries in 1995-96, and again in early 2000. They had been great friends for nearly 20 years and have been out to dinner and been to each other's homes. The attorney came to George's house the day after Kaylee was reported missing as a friend and for legal advice because George and Cindy didn't know who to turn to. So the defence arguments are just utter rubbish, in my opinion. I think George did well. I felt really bad for him, being questioned about abusing his own daughter while she sat there shaking her head. Absolutely disgusting. So I will be back with the next witness in the next video. So until then, bye for now.